here we are, 2020's all done and dusted. Well, nearly. We're in that fucking void between Christmas and New Year where it feels like you just sort of float.
Aye. And a year where time was already pretty meaningless. We're in the most meaningless week of that year. You know what I mean?
Aye, mate. Anyway, as we were saying, Merry Christmas, mate.
Aye, Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas to everybody that's listening. It's just been, I mean, we were just decided to do this like a yearly review. So I was saying to you off mic there, mate, I spent about an hour yesterday writing up some notes and then read them back again and was like, Jesus fuck, man, like. And then just decided to fucking chop some shit out because it was just so extensive. But even just try to think back to January last year, man, it feels like a fucking, a decade ago or something. Man.
This is the thing. I was watching the Death to 2020, the Charlie Brooker, and it's basically the yearly screen wipe, except he's taken himself out and replaced, his dialogue with people playing characters. I thought it was all right. And they opened up with like the Australian forest fires and obviously coming really close to the brink with Iran and stuff like that. And I was like, fucking hell, man! Like I actually like that was this year. Like normally, like the coming to the brink of world war and things like that would have been way higher up the list of things that instantly spring to mind. But I think the year's been that much an absolute fucking shit show that looking back on it myself, I was like, fuck, was that this year? Like several times.
Aye, absolutely, mate. I think that's probably like, it's cool to remind people that we did start the year with like half of Australia on fire or like half of the fucking planet on fire. And it felt like we were heading towards some sort of like pre-predicted extinction rebellion version of the apocalypse, which just soon went nowhere and we ended up like where we are here, which we'll talk about. But and as well, like fuck man, like Trump took out an Iranian like fucking general, like
just because.
I watched that Death to 2020 myself, and the response that Trump gave, I was actually sitting thinking, I mean, they highlighted it. They were like, I think he said that he came back with like the argument of like a 3-year-old or something like that, just like he's a bad guy, so we killed him. He was bad, he was a monster. And I was sitting thinking, like, that kind of sums up American foreign policy, is that they think that they're the perpetual good guy and that they're ridding the world of monsters, when it actually turns out that really it's all just like financially, like economically based. And I think that we're going to talk a lot about the economy. It's been used as like a sort of fucking battering ram for cunts this year to justify whatever they want to get done. But it was his response was hilarious. Just like, justify killing this guy is while Iran's in like protest and want to nuke the people of Iran want their government to nuke America, and he's just like, he was a monster. People said he was a monster, so we fucking killed him. It's like, wow, incredible.
I know, but that's the level. I mean, you're seeing it even now with this guy. I mean, since we last spoke, he's enacted, the first federal executions in America for, I think the previous one was like 2003. George Bush Jr. killed somebody at a federal level, and then again another like 20-year gap before it. So it's like, no. It's not a done thing, and especially not a done thing with, essentially a lame duck president, somebody who we all know is out in his arse in like, 10 days or so, hopefully, for him to be, I think he's killed something like 13 or executed 13 people in the last fortnight at a federal level. So he's not just like broke the convention and done it at a time where, does he really have the authority to be like killing people as electioneering for his next run, like law and order shit, law and order bullshit. But then this is clearly what his base response to, whether it be Iranian generals or sort of federal prisoners, is that their idea of justice is somewhat biblical, even if it's a misunderstood representation of what the Bible says about these things. Like, it's just draconian, like start to finish. Yeah. So I think his book ended the year with his brutality quite nicely, as well as peppering plenty across the faces of protesters and stuff throughout the year as well. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Also, like,
good riddance to him.
Record numbers of people dying in the global pandemic because he's in it. Like he's I don't know, his incompetence. The story of January that really, like, I was like, because the Australian fires, I was like, oh, right, aye. And the Iranian thing, I was like, fuck. And I think we covered both of them in the podcast. But I think the main story that gave me like a pure fuck was that this year was the Harry and Meghan. I couldn't believe that was this year. But I think like that was the big story for me in January, that Meghan Markle had announced that her and Harry were going to sort of take a step back and move to Canada. Or was it America? I'm sure it was Canada.
I think it was Canada as well.
What gave me doubt of that was the thing on that Death to 2020 where the woman said they were moving to America, the woman that was playing the Queen. She was like, they're moving for this country because it's racist to America, which has never had its problems with racism. I think that's
I'm pretty sure it's like Newfoundland or something like that they went to, like. So it's just it's Canadian territory.
The big story surrounding this really was just the sort of response that they got, especially, I think I remember Piers Morgan being like a big sort of screamer. How dare she? It was like almost like a group of mates when their mate first gets a bird and says, "Oh, listen, I'm not going to make 5 a-sides tonight, or I'm not going to be able to make it to the night out on Saturday because I'm doing something with my bird." That's like, she's changed you. It was like a sort of national version of that.
Aye, there certainly was. I mean, and I think probably why you've went fuck this was this year with that particular story is that was something that had been bubbling under the surface for a while. And I think some of our attitudes towards the Lassie, or some of the press's attitudes towards the Lassie, I mean, we spoke about it a few times where, we compare and contrast the coverage that she and the other one go, for the exact same shit. The juxtaposition in them was absolutely bonkers. And like we kind of concluded that it really was about, the Lassie's mixed race. There was a lot made about her being a divorcee, and you're like, it's the 21st century. Like, I mean, Prince Charles is a divorcee married to another divorcee. Why is it an issue that, somebody who's sixth in line to the throne and he gets further away every time they spit out another Wayne? Really, do we care? And I thought it quite sad in a way, because I think they were talking about a modern version of monarchy that I think I could probably live with. Like, they were talking about leaning less on the public purse, relying more on making their own money so that they could then, have the autonomy to make their own decisions. And, living Mary a kind of like almost celebrity lifestyle rather than, one a monarchy. And I'm like, when you look, we've used examples of places like Holland, some of the Scandinavian countries where the royal family are a royal family in name only, and these types of things have businesses or lawyers and have, professions and stuff like that. And it seems to work fine, but I don't know why this notion was such a radical idea. It's maybe just British traditionalism or whatever. I've got no problem with, folk who don't want to see something like the monarchy change. But, when you see the low-key undercurrent of racism that was allowed to kind of like run it rampant as a result of them asking for this slight change in their circumstances, then there's definitely bigger issues we need to address. And I think the whole thing, when you look at the year they've had, like with guys like Andrew and that, you know what I mean? You're just like, what are we doing here? This is outdated. Like, we don't need it. Like, and all it does is just, it's meant to bring the country together. But this year, the monarchy were a big part in what, drove people apart. A really sort of big wedge issue on a number of fronts. You know what I mean? So I don't know why we're still not asking the question, like, do we even need this shit anywhere? You know what I mean? Like,
I can't agree more. I think that we should absolutely move towards them being merry a sort of figurehead. I mean, in everything other than finances, really, I think that they are kind of obsolete and irrelevant. They've got no power. I don't think she or her family would ever try to interfere in sort of politics. But
Charles has like danced on the edges a few times, so he has like he was in a scandal a few years ago called the Spider Letters, and like that was they're called the Spider Letters because his handwriting's so bad that letters look like spiders on the page.
Oh, and this was the letters to Tony Blair.
I was like lobbying politicians and stuff like that, which is like not the done thing. But at the same time, largely speaking, those letters went in a drawer and were largely forgotten about. You know what I mean?
But they still draw the money. I think that's the main thing. I think the thing that really sort of sticks in people's sort of throat with it. I mean, I think exactly what you were saying, the sort of Spanish, Dutch type thing where they take a sort of like a celebrity like Grace and Monaco, like that type of thing. But I think the thing that really sort of I disagree with viscerally, they can have their palaces and they can be the king and queen of the country. They can do whatever they like, but it's the amount of money that they draw out of the public purse. I mean, at some point this year, I think COVID put a kibosh on it, but they announced some stupid budget for fucking Beatrice's wedding. And I think it was like 12 million quid they were giving her to have a wedding. And you're
I
like,
mean, that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest.
I mean,
you know what
who
I mean?
is she? The Queen's granddaughter?
I think, is it great granddaughter? No.
Andrew and Fergie's
granddaughter,
daughter. Which makes it even worse for me considering her dad's a fucking pretty much been fucking outed as a paedophile this year. They're trying to hand her 12 million quid. But thankfully COVID, I mean, let's look at the positives. Like COVID intervened and she didn't get a big
we've got to avoid another royal
wedding. But absolutely, man. Like I think, like you're saying, the royals have become a real. I think in Scotland it's always kind of been since. I mean, that was one of the things in 2014. We've got that famous video with that fucking idiot with the England top on talking about like the £22 million she brings in would if we stopped that it would bankrupt Britain. You know, like. £22 million isn't even a speck of dust on the economy's fucking cock. Yeah. But she might give more than she takes, but see that 20 odd million quid a year that she takes, see if she gives that back, it means that we get even more for her, considering that her family are probably one of the richest families on the planet. They can afford to give it back. So I think this is what sticks with people.
The duchies and the landownings and the holdings in companies all around the world, tax havens and all these other things that have been showing up. Like there's no need for them also to be like dipping into the public purse, and it is that whole it's tradition. And you're like, well, hold on, like they're like the biggest landowners in the country, like they don't need more money, but that 34 million, 36 million they got last year, whatever, in that ballpark. I mean, that could make a big difference to. Stuff at a ground level when we don't have, this money for school meals and we don't have the, whatever. But yet we're going, here's like 35 million, 36 million, no questions asked, see you later. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense anymore. And as I'm saying, I'm not saying abolish it. I'm just saying, when you look at the absolute riot they've been in this year, we probably need to just ask the question, like, do we need to like renegotiate this? Do we need to look at, other models and, honouring tradition whilst also like modernising, like how do we stop the backlash that we've already seen this year when people suggest even the slightest change to the institution, because it can't go on forever unchanged. Like it just doesn't make any sense. Absolutely,
mate. And then on the 31st of January, the fucking Big Ben told and we left the European Union. Well, the 12-month transitional period. 4 years after the vote kicked in, but I think as the years went on, this has kind of been forgotten about, isn't it? It's almost been like we got to December and it was like, oh fuck, we've got a Brexit negotiation that's been ongoing this year. We've had so many distractions, and it kind of like
come up other things, COVID. You know what I mean? Definitely got in more face and sort of masked a lot of what was going on, but at the same time, it also like stretched out the process. I think the 11 months was after an extension period because of COVID and stuff like that, where they couldn't negotiate due to travel restrictions for like months at a time and stuff like that as well. So it's had a big impact at every level of that one.
Aye, absolutely. But I mean, it kind of just they got to wave their flags, and then I mean, I think like what was coming round the corner was just like mammoth, mate. But I think it was weird how Brexit was. I don't know. January felt like the fucking Royal Rumble, and it just all got like settled. We had like climate change, we had like a racism question with Harry and Meghan, and we had Brexit coming up. It just felt like fuck, man. 2020's got off to a great start, but I mean, honestly, mate, we had absolutely no idea. But early in February, I think quite a significant thing happens when Rishi Sunak gets appointed Chancellor.
Yeah.
So at the time, I think people are just sort of looking in and going, right, ex-Goldman Sachs, wow, okay, see where this has gone. And it was almost like, I think I was just kind of like, this is like Clinton. This is what Clinton did in America, was just, he didn't have the economic sort of plan or like, well, what we're going to do here. So just handed it over to somebody that used to be a banker in the hope that he can just sort of like balance the books. And I don't know if that's what's happened, but it certainly looks like that to me.
I think the manner in which he was appointed as well was also interesting, and it was something that was echoed throughout the year again in terms of the machinations of, the Tory party behind closed doors. And it was that Sunak's predecessor essentially refused to bend the knee to Dominic Cummings and get binned. So he was asked to take on, advisors that were appointed directly by Dominic Cummings, and that would essentially report to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and Cummings sort of simultaneously. And the fella basically told him to stick it up his arse, which fair play to him. It's hard. It would, if you're a career politician walking away from the type of role that Sunak has stepped into, is bold. You know what I mean? Like, especially when it's about not accepting a position that's undermined. And I think when Sunak went in, we all were kind of like, well, I mean, this guy's clearly only here because he's going to do as he's told. You know what I mean? Like, so that was my sort of overriding first impression of him, was that it was going to be
a yes man,
a bit an empty jersey, really, and just there to do as Dominic Cummings tells him to do. I mean, and again, that's something that has caused clashes all throughout the year on various different issues, and resulted ultimately in this sort of stage managed exit of Cummings. Coincidentally, as Brexit gets over the line, they can go
I've actually got
somewhere
that.
else. You know what I mean?
That's what I've got in my notes. It's like no big coincidence that like all the Boris's head advisors have like decided as the Brexit deal starts to go over the line that they're off. I think it's like mission accomplished, really. We'll talk about that, I suppose, as we talk about like 2021. But on the 21st of February, UK gets its first COVID death. I think by this point, at the end of February, like we knew Italy was in lockdown, Spain was in lockdown. It was edging closer and closer. I mean, it was almost like the news of it, like coming up through Europe. But I think the UK government decided to just stick its finger in its ears and just go like, la, 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 no listening, didn't want to know anything about it. And I think since then, we've found out that they were all told in sort of January that, like, here's the action plan, here's what the World Health Organization. I think in a documentary that I watched, Trump was actually left, or the Trump administration were actually left like a battle plan. If a pandemic starts in Asia, here is exactly what you should do in the sort of timelines. And I think that was written by the CDC, and they just went like that with that playbook, just ripped it up and just fucking basketball hooked that fucker into the bin.
It was the Obama administration's playbook. So it was binned because it had at some point or other been authorised by Barack Obama. But it was crazy. I mean, I don't think it was like watching almost that, oncoming tsunami, if you were imagining looking south across Europe and stuff like that, seeing these numbers start to pile up, seeing Italy start to lock down, and then obviously, Spain starting to skyrocket. And then, weeks passed where the government was advising us not to do this and advising us not to do that, and they never actually took any meaningful and sort of definitive action until whatever the 23rd of March. And I think at that point,
when we come to March, I've got like a fucking speech that I'm going to say, but not really. But I think like at this point, people, I don't know. I'm trying to remember back and sort of like, I'd like to have been able to go back and listen to what we were saying around about the time, but I'm pretty sure that we were already kind of going, something needs to happen.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of conversations recently. I don't know, like, it's just to really get like your opinion on this, because I'll be really interested in the outcome. But I'm a staunch like independent supporter. But I want to hear where Nicola Sturgeon sits, like in this particular bit of the timeline, where we know that the Trump administration, and I think they had said that the G8 had been told in January, lockdowns, you need to start preparing for lockdown. And then we end up at the 26th of March, but we almost like followed the UK government with their measures. And like, I don't think that I'm going to really be that satisfied where, well, we were tied to what they were deciding today in the face of like, what we've been told back then could be like 2% to 10% of the population dying through like, I mean, I'm my feeling and my gut feeling, and I'll pass it out to you after I say this, is that it's became a financial thing, that they've been told that they won't get the backing and they won't get the support to lock down, even if they wanted to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the financial side of things is obviously a big factor in it. I mean, we know that there was a lot of criticism of Johnson refusing to lock down officially, and there was chatter, insurance companies lobbying and putting pressure on them to make sure they didn't have to pay out on businesses closing for and stuff like that. Johnson should have locked down sooner. Play a part, especially how quickly or how fast they opened back up again, especially in comparison to Scotland. In terms of like that, how quickly they locked down, I can see both sides of it. Scotland has subsequently went on and made a number of decisions for itself in terms of how it handles it. It could have been quicker to do that, I think. But at the same time, in the early days of this, when nobody really knows what was going on, like conflicting messages was a real worry, and undermining like the definitive stuff that had to happen early on, like washing hands, wearing masks, and all these things that are now sort of common practice, had to be really underlined. I think had there been like a full nation separate approach at that point, things might have got confusing. You know what I mean? Like, so there is part of me that I can go, well, we've taken steps on our own since, and it's worked out in our favour, so we should have done it sooner. But at the same time, in those early days, I don't know if I would have been, if I was sitting in the Scottish government, would I have been willing to have like directly undermined the messaging for Westminster in a global pandemic? You're going to get hammered either way. You're either going to get hammered up front for causing confusion, or people are going to go back to it in hindsight and go, as we're doing, like, did you actually react quick enough here? You know what I mean? Like, so kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't with something.
Absolutely. I think that's what I'm fond with as well, is that it's been sort of the good for the good of everybody in the sort of in the UK. I suppose it just supports, and with hindsight, it just supports an argument for independence because it's we're not tied to this full nation approach. We need, and like you're saying, it did kind of make sense to me at the time as well. Yeah. But the bit that I'm sort of like, as if they were told. And if they were told and they decided not to because the Tories down in Westminster said you only get the backing for us if you do this and whatever earlier, and then, I don't know, man. I think, again, the talking to people about this, it keeps going back. There was actually two people went back to, but we need to stop this because we need independence. And it's kind of like, man, I don't buy that, man. I'm not buying that. Like, if the SNP have fucked us, they've fucked us. Aye, absolutely. I think furlough has been a game changer. The
Scottish government couldn't have done that on its own.
That's it. And I think that's why I'm saying the finances have come into it. They couldn't afford to do whatever they wanted to do, which I hope they use as more an argument for independence, and it doesn't end up in a sort of rabble of like SNP bad, which even in the last couple of, like the last month, unfortunately, even sort of people that have got my respect in politics, people within this podcast have reduced themselves to that. I don't think I'll name any names. The big story that jumped out at me for February, because we need to remember that this is all pre-COVID, is that the life expectancy in the UK regressed for the first time in a century.
I remember that at the time.
And in the same week, a report was published talking about the severe impact on mental health that universal credit has had on the population of the UK. And I don't think that they two stories are like not connected. But I literally, like, if Rees-Mogg and his like sort of ideal is to drag us back to Victorian times, then they're fucking doing a great job, because we're actually dying younger for the first time in 100 years. We've not made any progress on that, man. That's wild to me.
I think when we look at the marvels of modern medicine and how, look at this year alone, how, we've had quotes for guys saying, 18 to 20 years worth of immunology work has been done in like 9.5 months, because the sciences and medicine have collaborated in a way that they've never seen before. Like, medical technology is at a stage where, there's very few problems that we're kind of, make progress, at least progress in. So to see us take steps backwards in terms of life expectancy as a result of like societal pressures is like extremely worrying, because, it's square at the door of governmental policy, because it's roofs over people's heads, it's food on people's plates, and there's just ideologically against helping people on that front. And the results are, there to be seen.
Absolutely, mate. Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I think it's, like you're saying, it's been political choice. And I think that when the history books look back, Cameron's going to have a lot to answer for. A hell of a lot to answer for. No, even just, his legacy is Brexit, but this is a legacy of that government. Clegg as well. I think we shouldn't really forget that the Liberal Democrats signed off on all the austerity plans that sort of lit the fire.
Yeah, I don't think the UK electorate has forgot that, to be honest with you. Just look at where they poll now and how they, represent in Parliament and in Holyrood. You know what I mean? Like, it's just one of the parties that I think people are just done with. You know what I mean? Like, there used to be the sort of middle ground between, some of the other two, but I don't even think that's the case. I think that period of time where Cameron has completely sullied them. You know what I mean? Like, I would never even think about it at this point.
Aye, absolutely. I think like a third party really gets a generational vote, don't they? They'll maybe see an opening once in a generation, and I think Tony Blair and Gordon Brown opened that door to Nick Clegg and more of a sort of centre like idea. Yep. And he was that's just a weird one, because it just sort of shows you how much politics is just dodgy salesmanship, because that's all that he did really, was just promise you, and then once you got under the car bonnet, they'd fuck all, they'd nothing there. And they could have fought Cameron's Conservatives because they were hanging on by a shoestring even way their coalition, but they decided to do nothing about it. But I suppose that's not part of 2020.
Cameron will ultimately be remembered for, allowing the referendum to build the Yes movement. Scottish independence prior to, the Indie Ref was polling in the teens and the 20s. You know what I mean? Like, that campaign awakened the idea of independence and, what is now the majority of Scottish minds. You know what I mean? Like, so he's caused Brexit, which we're seeing, or we're going to continue to see into 2021 and beyond. And I think there'll be lines drawn back to him when it comes to independence, when it inevitably happens as well. You know what I mean?
So some good, some bad.
Aye, so he gets for being a big fucker.
I hope he enjoys the south of France. I wonder if he'll get extradited. Like, well, I suppose we'll go our Brexit deal now, haven't we? So it doesn't really matter anymore. But the big month of the year was March, mate. Like I said, I've prepared a wee speech. I've just got some points, because see, when I sat down and I read it and I laid it out, I was actually like pure wow. Like, it just demonstrates how much they don't know what they're doing. When you read it out. So what I'll do is I'll read out the points that I pulled, which I feel are like the main points, and then we can just talk about like how we sort of remember it and how we felt, because I think I remember at the time we were talking quite a lot about like, fuck man, this is like, it was. Have you lost me?
No, I'm still hearing it.
It was like a big sort of, not only like monumental sort of thing socially, but just sort of like personally for people. It was like a big, like a massive event. But so like the first week, the government drew up an action plan, and actually in the action plan, and I don't remember this, there was a prolonged pandemic scenario which said that worst case scenario will be the 1st of November. So that was their idea of, this is as bad as it's going to get, which I'm actually like gobsmacked that they thought that far. They thought it was going to go that far, because I'm sure the first thing was 3 weeks. If you remember that.
Aye, that's exactly how it was pitched to us. It was in that sort of 3 weeks. When I went after work, I was like,
it'll be reviewed every 3 weeks, guys. Well, the government had a plan that was drew up nearly 3.5 weeks before they shut down the country, saying that it could last to the 1st of November in worst case scenarios, but obviously we're sitting here just now, like the 28th, 29th of December, and we're getting back. We're kind of like back at the start.
We're in lockdown again,
the 5th of March, government are told by Chris Whitty that the doubling will begin within the next couple of days. And the Prime Minister announced a £45 million battle fund to help research COVID-19. £45 million. So we're talking about that like 22 million pound thing earlier on with the Queen. It's not even a speck. That's how much they thought. We'll throw some money at it. But in the 5th of March, the government chief science officer, isn't he, Chris Whitty, told them that the doubling would start. And at this point, this is when the government start telling you to wash your hands.
I mean, that's like, what, a week into March?
5th of March,
the first cases in Wuhan were like late December. So you're talking like an entire financial quarter has passed before the British government decided to do fucking end about it, really.
Dude, this is 2 weeks after we have our first death.
Aye.
So, like, we have our first case in January at some point, but 2 weeks after the first COVID-19 death, and the chief science officer saying the cases are going to double within the next couple of days, and then it will continue to double until we do something. The Prime Minister doesn't go to the first 2 Cobra meetings for a start, which were held at the start of March, and then secondly, he's a wee token 45 million. And again, like, I suppose if people are listening and going, 45 million pounds a lot of money, i.e. it's a epic amount of money to any individual. But see, if you've ever worked in a big business, or if you do any reading on like government spending, it's nothing.
Yeah. Aye. These are people that deal in trillions. You know what I mean? Like 45 million is in government terms changed in the back of the couch. Aye.
So here's a hilarious one for you. So this is 4 days later. So we're at the 9th of March. Sunak announces a 30 billion budget to help fight the COVID economic impact. 7 days later, releasing 330 billion. So, like, on the 9th of March, he did a budget that assigned £30 billion to help hit but then 7 days later, they're forced to release another £330 billion.
So like, this is 11 what I'm saying, times like, their initial estimates in the course of a week.
Within a week, this is what I'm saying, like the pure. And I suppose this goes back to back up exactly what you were saying, dude, about like the Scottish government is that you're sitting there going, what the fuck? They assigned 30 billion and then 7 days later 330. So they really just were clueless. I think they were just throwing darts at a dartboard with like solutions.
Just make numbers up and just hoping that it was going to be enough. You know what I mean? Like,
but to consider that by this point, Italy had been in lockdown for nearly 6 weeks, France had been in lockdown for nearly 4 weeks, Germany had been in lockdown for a fortnight, and we've got Boris cleaning his hands with Kerex on the news. But then not even that, dude.
Yourself.
Not even that. Like a week later, talking about how he was shaking the hands of COVID patients in a hospital.
So this was the one that got me at early doors, and unsurprising, and like the least surprising turn of events of all 2020 was that guys like Johnson and Trump ended up catching COVID, and Johnson, standing there at the podium, behind the seal of his office, talking about how he was in hospital shaking hands, and guys, just an absolute fuckstick. Like, and I find it like quite ironic. This was one of these bits of 2020 that lizard part of my brain kind of enjoyed, and it was that populists like Johnson and Trump, who go into their position at least partially by saying, like, don't trust what the media have to tell you, don't believe this, don't believe that, found themselves at the head of their countries during a global pandemic where they needed people to listen to what the advice of the government was to stop this from spreading, and they found themselves trapped in like this web of their own making, where they've made mainstream channels so distasteful to their supporters that their messaging couldn't get through, and like it was terrible that numbers spiked, but like just there was like a nice wee sort of symmetry there on both of their fronts.
It was beautiful. It was like
to yourself, you know what I mean?
Where does Trump go? Like, he's especially, I mean, it started to really hit here. And I think that we've spoke plenty about QAnon, we've spoke plenty about fucking COVID mums. And like the fucking, just exactly what you said there, dude. Like the whole Trump thing is this premise that he's somehow some sort of warrior sent for God to like save America and save democracy and save capitalism. as if we didn't create these things and that we could actually save them by ourselves. We don't need fuckstick Donald Trump to, even though he's incapable of doing that anyway. And then all of a sudden he's like, I'm not wearing a mask. I'm still doing my rallies. And it's like, oh, but I'm sick. And it was almost like, I think at that point in time, me and you had a small conversation, but we did chat in the podcast about like, what does this mean for his election? Because now, where does his supporters go? It just so happened that his supporters just fucking doubled down a belter on it, like just started arming themselves and taking to fucking local sort of town halls and courts and sort of like screaming about their freedoms and that you know what I mean? It was like a weird sort of like, they just ignored that whole thing.
I've had a really famous picture of the guy who had been protesting his restrictions in his local state, and he was standing in Subway sandwiches with like an AR-15 strapped to his back, and you're like, I know it's technically legal in some of these places, but think about how insecure you need to be as a person that you have to walk up and down the street with an assault rifle strapped to your back in public. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. We're going to talk more about BLM in a minute, but America's like, that shit was crazy. I mean, I think the worst one that I seen was the guy and the woman in their front garden. The guy had the AR-15 and she had the Glock, and he looked like something out of Miami Vice. He's like tucked in pink polo shirt and he's like white. I mean, there couldn't have been a better image for like the insanity of America than two people standing outside their mansion with nobody anywhere near it, with a fucking assault rifle, like sort of protecting their property, like for this invisible enemy. But just like you were saying there with the sort of symmetry with Trump and that, this has all just been coming since, I think, the late 90s, where every enemy's been invisible. Everything's been kind of believe it because it's real. Like the terror threats going for like amber to red and all this sort of like bullshit that they've been forcing on people coming to a head. Like, exactly. And now it comes to a head where they're like, we need to down tools with this, and we need to actually go, guys, listen, you need to listen to us because this real invisible killer's coming for you. And people are like, I don't believe it. It's Bill Gates trying to fucking microchip me, or it's 5G or whatever other mental. This has been playing out over the course of a decade with like media and politics, and it's like the chicken's coming home to roost. So there is a beautiful symmetry that comes with it. So we're at the middle of March. What I was like, this is where it starts to get a wee bit sinister for me. Football and all sporting events are cancelled. The health minister, Nadine Dorries, tests positive, and it isn't for another 5 days that the Prime Minister comes out and advises people that are over 70 or have pre-conditioned respiratory diseases to stay home in the coming weeks. So football's cancelled. Fucking people in Parliament are catching this disease, and they wait another 5 days to tell the elderly and the vulnerable to start to shield. It isn't until the 16th of March that they do that. Now, this is where I think, again, it's really important, because Matt Hancock later in sort of June, July, claimed that this is the date that they locked down.
Yes.
When actually it's not. So we need to be very, very careful that they don't try and rewrite history with us. So the 16th of March, the vulnerable and anybody with a pre-existing condition is advised to stay home, and the daily press conferences begin. And this is when I really remember, like, I was really starting to get worried at this point. Like, I was starting to be like, fuck, I'm not doing this. I started to really adjust my behaviour. I
was starting to see it a lot in town, and I think we commented on at the time, again on the podcast, when, you know, working in the city centre, seeing just the actual almost overnight drop off in foot traffic was quite eerie and quite surreal. To be there, you know, 9 months later, and it's still, you know, still a very, very quiet place in relative terms, the city centre. It did get really real at that point, I think. I remember my concerns starting to shift towards like my team and stuff like that, where, you know, obviously one of the big issues for me is that, you know, my team is in the building, so, you know, we're either there or we're not. And, you know, try to, you know, allay people's concerns, and, you know, talking about what we need, you know, was a big thing for the employers, and like you're starting to see everything just move on, you know, sort of every level of professional life, because, everybody had questions about every aspect about what was coming. So that took up a lot of my time. And then the lockdown finally came after we were saying it has to be the day, it has to be the day, it has to be the day for about a week. And then it finally came, and that, going through the panic and the hecticness of it all till it just a dead stop was, again, really quite a jarring experience.
Absolutely, mate. So, on you go, sorry.
I was going to say, it felt almost like the election when we were sitting. I was saying to you, I was sitting watching News 24 during the American election for what felt like days at a time, and like those first few days in lockdown felt very similar, where you're sitting there with the news on, going, right, what's happening now, and seeing numbers spike, seeing countries lock down, seeing travel bans come in, and all these types of things. I can get why a lot of people's reaction to it was to just disconnect it, because it is, a really unique and really sort of jarring experience. I think that we've all
absolutely, mate. Absolutely, man. I mean, I think that's where I personally, I mean, even though we come on here and we talk about things, and we're talking about like some of these conspiracies and some of the people and the way that they're going about it and the way they're trying to sort of combat is really just to alleviate their own worries. I think like people can't deal with us. Like they just can't deal with it. They don't have space for it in their mind or in their emotions. So they need to push it as far away. And I think like as we've been going through 2020 and we've been podcasting, been doing it remotely, I think actually I'd put in my notes to say like, man, like well done, because we've fucking kept us going all the way through this. It's no like just me
sometimes, but
you know what I mean? But like the two of us have kept us going. So like I think we deserve a fucking well done, and we get a lot of sort of stuff early Christmas period, people on Twitter, a couple of people on Instagram DMing me and saying like thanks and stuff, which is like amazing. Like
that was really nice. Of get a few nice messages for a change. They're no one with you.
Absolutely, but like I've got empathy and compassion for people that have sort of disconnected for this, because it's a lot to fucking take in. It's a lot to deal with. And I think that when we talk about the sort of timeline, like furlough gets announced on the 23rd, Prince Charles tests positive, heads for Aberdeen, clap for NHS on the 27th, Matt Hancock tests positive on the 28th. They announced that mental health will be impacted by this lockdown on the 29th. Like so many things just like happened. And like you're saying, not only did we have almost like this manic thing like happening in the news, on your social media, but your actual real life, there was nothing happening. So you just had all this time to just sit and engage and think about things. And I think that for a lot of people, it just became too much. And like you're saying, it became more of a, I don't know how I can impact this. I don't know what I should be doing. So much information, disinformation out there, that I'm just going to be like, fuck it, and just get it to fuck away from me.
Definitely.
So, March was a fucking...
You know what I mean? Like, I went into it quite kind of like, oh, hey, a couple of weeks off, let's, think about stuff we can do around the house. And as, people were reaching for bread makers and all that kind of shit to occupy themselves. But one of the ones I did get a bit of chuckle at was the panic buying. As we headed towards lockdown, and for some reason, and to this day, I don't have a legitimate explanation as to why it happened, but why everybody in the country all at once panic bought toilet roll. I mean, I've seen pictures of people's like hall cupboards that were like chocked to the brim with toilet roll, people like tying down the back bonnet of their motor, with stuff busting out. And I don't know where or how the toilet roll rumour started, but it was a very specific, very like odd panic nationwide. Everybody kind of went into. Thankfully, it was something that we kind of learned through. I think supermarkets adapted pretty quickly.
Well, of course it did, because there's money to be made in panic buying bog roll. But God forbid that we feed starving children, but the middle class cannot have a shitty arse. Like we can't let that fucking happen. But I mean, the panic buying. I think. Do you know what? Like. This was kind of like put to me at the time, and I was just kind of like, made me think about it, and I was like, that's so fucking, it is so true and relevant, that panic buying's like a total privilege. Like, I think the one that get put to me was that somebody that I knew went to the dentist, and we're talking to their dentist, and the dentist was like, I've got a newborn, and we went and bought as many nappies as we could get and as many like baby wipes as I could get my hands on. And obviously, like I was just sitting there saying to the person that was telling me this, well, you know what, like they had a newborn kid and they're just trying to take care of their fucking womb. And they were like, well, what about somebody that can't afford to go and spend 150 quid on nappies for the next 3 months? What are they supposed to do? They're literally like behind you in the queue, but don't have the money to go and buy weeks and weeks worth. So the fact that you're going in and wiping the shelves means that there's somebody there that probably genuinely needs the nappies. And I was like, do you know what, man? I didn't even think about it like that, that they're using their sort of financial privilege to panic buy, while there's people out there that don't know where they're going to get the money for the nappies. And then the worst thing that happens is that they scrape together the £5 or the set. I'm not even going to pretend to know how much a fucking pack of nappies costs. They managed to scrape together the money to
I would
buy
certainly hope no.
adult baby
fetish or something. If you know how much nappies cost, then we might need to talk after this.
Check my hard drive. But they scrape together the money to go, and then they go down to the local Tesco or Lidl or whatever, and there's none there because some fucking nuggets went and spent a couple of £100 on toiletries for the. So I was like, do you know what, man? This is the pure prime example of like all these things have got a consequence to them. It's not just about you and getting down there and buying as much dry pasta as you can buy just in case. Just in case what? Like, for fuck's sake, like, what? This is the thing, like we're saying there, we live in a capitalist society. Do you think Tesco's going to run out of fucking bog roll? No, the longest they're going to be without it's a day. And then they will be it'll be at the front of the store. They'll be like, come on, hurry up, like, get your bog roll.
Take it straight off the pallet. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But the panic buying, it was like individualism meets mental health issues meets fucking a global pandemic, and this is what happens is that everybody, I mean, we've sat for years and watched documentaries about doomsday preppers and laughed up, look at these fucking nutcases, and then an actual like real thing hits and we all turn into one.
We're all doomsday preppers now.
Right, exactly that. But mate, that was March, and I think like I was taking notes and I thought, I'll do what I did with the other months. I'll pick out a story. And I thought, no, because this actual timeline reads like an insane like episode, like an actual like mental breakdown, a national mental breakdown happened in March. And I think that when we're speaking about January and February there, it was so like this happened and it was almost sort of like so abstract. And then March hit and it's like pure, everything's very fucking real and like.
I didn't go month by month. I went by. That's kind of why I went by issues. This and when I was doing notes, like so, I've got screeds of Brexit, screeds of COVID, and like time did become a bit of a kind of just amorphous blob for me during it because I went into it to start with being like, we'll walk down for a couple of weeks, day were apart, and then get back to real life. So as I say, I was like reading books and playing PlayStation and like enjoying. To an extent, no having to interact with people because, as we know, like left-to-main devices, I pretty much hate people. So having like peace and quiet and space was like quite enjoyable for a bit. But as time progressed, it very quickly became like a bit of a quagmire where a lot of what people are talking about when it comes to their mental health were definitely on display. I mean, I said at the time that. I just went into like survival mode. I just like went through being like nice and chilled and relaxed to being like hunkered down, like very, very quickly. Just muscle memory for, previous long-term absences. And, by the time I got to like 3-4 months in, I had that last 2 months before going back to work where like time was just meaningless. Like, I was like in one of the, like cubes for like Superman 2, where it's just, you're just floating off in your own wee isolation cube into space. You know what I mean? Like, that's very much the way towards the end that I felt. So, fair fucks to anybody that got through it. You know what I mean? Like I say, a lot of folk made a lot of positive changes and stuff like that, but I don't think enough gets made of folk that just get through it. You know what I mean?
I think like we've spoke many a time about this country and this, and when I talk about country, I'm talking about Britain's obsession with the world wars. See, to be honest, mate, and I don't want to. Well, do you know what? Fuck it. This is the way I feel. I feel like this has been worse for people because it's almost like mental. There's been so much of that, and I don't mean mental as in like, oh, that's mental. I mean mental as in like, this has been like a war on people's psychology. Now, if you've got a real enemy and you've got a war that's raging in Europe, like we did in the last World War, you can see it. People are going and dying. You can feel it. This is where I think that we've kind of like, this is where this has been, it's not been any better or worse. I feel like it's different. I just hate when people like, that generation seen through 2 world wars and look at the way they came out. They pushed fucking PTSD onto their kids that then pushed them onto us as a fucking generation. Let's not fucking sugarcoat it. Like they marched through the war. There were people that were fucking attacked in the street for being conscientious objectors, like religious. We just don't get to see this. But this global pandemic has been like a war on people's like mentality, and it's invisible. And there's people out there that are like, well, I don't know anybody that's died for it, so it must not be real. And this is what's been very, very different. We're having to like deal with these people, not even just like on Twitter or on Facebook, but people are having to deal with like their parents turn a conspiracy, like having to like have real arguments. Do you know what I mean? Like real friends and shit. So I think that I was saying that to agree, man. I think we should actually all look at each other and go, we've come through this, man. Like, and we've done it no too badly. Like as in like a sort of person to person basis. Like I think that, and I suppose like when we go back and we talk about the start of the pandemic, we'd talked about maybe unintentional positive outcomes that will come at the other side will come together, and a lot of that hasn't come to fruition. But this has become
fucking miles off,
mate. I think, see, when we were talking about that, that's when it was talking like 3 to 6 weeks, and we're like, right, well, we might be able to take stock of this and go, where did we fail, and what can we do better if this ever comes around next time? But we're like 9 months deep. It's pushing. It's going to be over a year that we're going to be dealing with these measures. Like people can't cope with it, but we should look at each other and be proud, I think.
I definitely think so. I mean, it's one of the ones where, as I was saying elsewhere, and I think we've said here as well, like this is the first time a lot of people have had that time and space to have to like confront themselves, you know what I mean, where there was no other option but to address whatever they were thinking or whatever they were feeling, because there was literally nothing to distract them for it. So in that respect, like if you've, you know, come out the other side of that journey during a pandemic, like you've just been baptized by fire, man. Like you will beat anything that you face in life, you know, and whether it was a bumpy ride or no, you know what I mean? Like if you get through this, you know what I mean, there's nothing you can't get through. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's something that people definitely need to take away from it.
That's good cognitive behavioural therapy, dude. That's it. Change the way you fucking think and the things will change. So as we come out to the other side, I think this is actually like today's link where you're talking about people who've got more time to sit and really take stock of what's going on. And I think the George Floyd murder really, that galvanised a lot of people, as we did have a lot of time. And there was a shocking video. Obviously, like we can briefly talk about George Floyd. He was murdered by, I mean, he was supposed to be using a counterfeit $20 bill. They sent 4 police officers to deal with him. He put up no fight. They handcuffed him. They put him down. The guy kneeled on his neck for near 8 minutes. He told him that he was dying and then started sort of shouting out for his mum. It shocked the world. Like it really shocked the world, that video. And I think that the lockdown that was happening almost globally, I think ignited this fire, because it was almost like we all woke up at the same time and seen this. I don't know if you felt like that, but I certainly felt like that. Like it just sort of like, whoa, what the fuck?
I think the footage of a black man in America falling victim to police violence, I mean, it's going to sound a wee bit cynical on my part, but it's no hugely, you know, surprising considering how much we see, how often we see it. I think, as you say, that time and space that people have got during this year definitely has fed into the reaction, because, you know, it wasn't just on an individual level that we had to think about what this meant for us and how we felt about it. Like, it happened at a societal level where, you know, we had like a worldwide conversation at various levels of government and various levels of business, and everybody was trying to kind of reassess what, you know, it's all right being up for equality, but what it actually meant to be anti-fascist or anti-racist. And like, that was a more in-depth conversation, I think, than we've ever had at the type of, breadth and sort of level that conversation was had all across the world.
I agree.
And having the space to have that thought process kick in and the time to not be at work where protests can happen and organising can happen, definitely all played a big part in it.
Absolutely, mate. And I think like we seen like real examples like social consciousness shifting, especially in the UK. I mean, we've seen the statue, Colston statue in Bristol get teared down and flung into a river.
Yeah.
Sadiq Khan took down a statue outside some monument in London, a slave owner. And in this city, in particular in Glasgow, like we were calling into question the names of the streets. And I think like one of the big kickbacks that came, especially for like, unfortunately, sort of white middle class to like political class, the media class, was what are they trying to achieve here? What's the point? Are we trying to erase history? And I think like actually what was achieved, exactly what you just said there, that's what was getting, I think even at the time, I questioned in the podcast, is this a dangerous thing that we're doing and blah, blah, blah. And it was just me like asking a question. I had no sort of like leaning either way or another. But as I've reflected on the year, I've been like, do you know what? What happened was what's supposed to happen. There was a big event that made everybody, I mean, I think at the time I was like, we all Googled who this fucking cunt was the next day. That's one thing. So we become aware. The second thing is we start to have these conversations about like, why is Buchanan Street called Buchanan Street and do we want that? We don't necessarily saying, let's go and rip down the street signs like the fucking gammon, because a week later, we had fucking idiots gone and defending statues of people that...
the statue defenders, which was just the weirdest social movement that I have ever encountered anywhere. And for it to have happened in Glasgow as well, I've got to say I was thoroughly fucking embarrassed to see these chimps on the fucking street, like hounding people like, our guest Tommy for just basically being on the street and looking different, like whilst they were simultaneously there to defend statues. And you're like, what have the two things got to do with each other? I mean, you were defending, statues of Peel, who, founded the police, whilst simultaneously breaking the law to do it. And you're just like the imagery and everything about it was just hilariously bang. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think so that was just the whole questions being asked. And I think like there was a lot of people that came out and sort of spoke about like, well, this was the other sort of paradox that happened where the right all of a sudden cared about social distancing and wearing masks. But, again, like I think at the time I was kind of like, I don't know, like we were supposed to be, well, do you know what? Like equality is bigger than a pandemic. And if somebody actually goes, do you know what? I'm going to go to this protest and then I'm going to isolate for 14 days. And my life is actually worth risking to go and be part of a movement that's asking for equality.
Definitely.
And I'm like, do you know what? That was big enough. But then I'd like to ask that same question to any statue fuckers. Was gone there and protecting the statue, a guy that died like 200 years ago and probably would have been pissed on you if you were on fire because you're working class.
Let's also say statues that were under absolutely zero threat whatsoever for anybody.
Yeah. Was that worth putting your life at risk? I don't think so. I think, but
I think we also, when we spoke to Barrington, we spoke quite at length about how you organised the thing at Glasgow Green, and what kind of logistics go into that. So I think when we talk about the distancing and the precautions, like those were, at least in Glasgow, all present and where they needed to be. You know what I mean? So I think we'll hopefully address that element when we had that conversation with Baz.
Aye, absolutely. I mean, that's it. I mean, I think pretty much all of these issues that we're talking about, we've done podcasts on them, which is good, man. Like we're doing a year review and we're talking about all the big events that's happened, and we've had either a conversation between me and you or a representative, actually, like Tommy or like Baz for BLM Scotland. Like, I think that's part of what I'm really proud of this year is that, again, like we were saying earlier, is like, well done for keeping this going. But not even just that, mate. We've had some great conversations with people about some really difficult issues during the fucking global pandemic. So, absolutely. What was hilarious, I felt, know that anything about the George Floyd murder or anything like BLM's hilarious, that is that like when Boris got COVID, his deputy, the guy that stood in as PM, was Dominic Raab, kind of proving that Boris isn't the bottom of the barrel after all. Like, there is worse. Like, we could get worse. But at this sort of time, they had, where are we? We went down into lockdown in March. So no even 2.5 weeks after we went into lockdown, March and April, they announced that we were getting past the peak, which with hindsight's just an absolute riot to think that in April they were like, here we go, we're getting past the peak. Okay, no bother. But
because Trump was he was there talking about how it'd all be done and dusted for Easter, and you're like, Easter 2021?
Mate, the Queen said in her speech, this nation needs Easter more than ever. For what? For a fucking Cadbury's Easter egg? Like, for what? To celebrate the... Like, come on to fuck. Is this really where we are in 2020? Is that we need some sort of fucking mythical character to rise for the dead and go and roll a fucking egg down a hill to, like, galvanise a nation behind... This is where I was like, I'm so disconnected for a lot of people on this. Like, we need Easter more than ever. Easter passed without me even realising it. I didn't even fucking know it was Easter, apart from I got a chocolate egg. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, having a kid in the house, like, you're aware of when Easter is just purely because it's chocolate eggs. Like, we've never been overtly... The way did our sacraments going through school. But, I mean, beyond that, it's never been something that we've tried to force on her.
Aye. I think at this point, Trump was actually telling people to inject bleach, was he no? Is that no?
So like, that was one of his solutions. The footage of that is one of the highlights of 2021.
The woman in the corner, like, she's pure.
Just like pure.
She's hopping up and down in her seat almost, like, pure, oh my God, did you just say that? Oh my God. I mean, telling people to ingest disinfectant because it wipes away COVID. It's almost like he's watched a Dettol advert and been like,
don't forget ultraviolet light as well.
Ultraviolet.
Bleach and light.
That's it. 99.9% kills germs, right? Okay, let's have a wee look at the back of the packet. Kills coronaviruses within 2 minutes, right? Cool. Do you know what we need to do? We need to replace our skin with, like, antibacterial wipes. And just, like,
keep in mind that, like, he was having that conversation, and I think, again, we covered this at the time, but he was having that conversation in the public because in private, the White House was being lobbied by an industrial bleach company that masqueraded as a church. So they were actually selling the idea that their bleach was some sort of holy water to Trump, to the White House, basically. And then he's walked straight out of that ridiculous fucking meeting to then start talking about bleach and press conferences in front of the entire world. Like, it's just this pure linear connection in his thought process where everything's just a straight line for where he's just been to where he thinks he's gone. You know what I mean?
It's like, it's that person that hears a word, right, and goes, what's that word? And finds out a way to use it in every sort of conversation. You hear that word for like the next year, where you're just like, God, please stop using that fucking word. Like, I get that you've learned that word, but come on, to fuck. I mean, this cunt used to put it in song lyrics and everything, man. You'd be like, mate, come on. We can't put concur into a fucking song lyric. But Trump's like that. He's a charlatan. He's a total charlatan. Like you're saying, he comes out of these meetings and starts to use the language that he's heard to try and make himself sound smart and whatever. Like, but that was part of the year that I was like, wow. During the summer months, Trump told people to ingest bleach and ultraviolet light to try and combat coronavirus. But I think, like, the big story of the summer was, for me, was the sort of the easing of the lockdown that we've seen. I think the 15th of June, the non-essential retail opened back up.
Yep.
Then on the 25th of June, the PM put Leicester back into lockdown as, like, the cases started to spike.
Yep. I think Aberdeen would have probably been Aberdeen were out of lockdown for like a fortnight, then walked back down again, didn't they?
Exactly.
So that would have been at the same time.
Not only that, mate, but thousands and thousands and thousands of people took to the beaches in August, which caused like a major
Those pictures
spike.
were bonkers.
Aye, and I think this is like, there's a part of this that doesn't sit well with me, where, as we've spoke about all the way through this podcast, the confusing message that was put out by the governments, to then sort of like blame individual responsibilities on this, like the kind of. So for me, we spoke about it at the time, these fucking idiots that have went. But looking back at it, you can kind of, while the government are saying the spikes were past the worst in April, it's not until July and August that we see people take to the beaches in the well. We have the sunniest day of the year.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that people were just like, I'm going out. Like, the retail's opening back up, things are getting back to, let's get back to normal. I think at this point in time, furlough, like getting people off of furlough was incentivized. I think he'd announced that for every person that a business brings back off of furlough gets $1,000.
Yep.
So, like, the message was, let's get back to normal. And then people took to the beaches, and the BBC and all the mainstream media is like, wow, look at these fucking idiots. And you're kind of like, you can't, how can we do that? How can we condemn these people?
That mixed messaging has been prominent throughout the entire process. I mean, even when you look at all the way up to like last week with Christmas, where, you know, we've got that same scenario for Johnson in regards to Christmas as we did with Trump and Easter, where he had set in his head that everybody was going to be back to normal and, you know, life would be what it was again for Christmas because whatever, Christianity or some shit. And like
the Mayan calendar.
Aye, like whatever the pressure was, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, we all wanted to get together with family in a year where we've not been able to do that. Like, it goes without saying. But he put so much pressure on it that it became an absolute farce. And it was like, don't go here, but then if it's family or you're a carer and again, every announcement comes with so many caveats, and every announcement seems to sometimes like contradict the previous announcement, and it's just this rolling cycle of like, all right, what has changed and what hasn't changed and what area and what not. And it's, I get why people have throughout the process fallen foul, but then I think the messaging has been deliberately vague in a lot of instances so that the government, when the time comes, can point at it and go, well, look at what we advised. And you're like, but as we discussed at the start of lockdown, advice and, you know, demands are different when it comes to the government. You know what I mean? Advice was, we advise you to stay away from pubs. It's not the same as close all pubs in the country. You know what I mean? So, you know, had they taken action when they were supposed to at the various points, we might not have been in a position where they had to feel like they blame the public. But this was, I think, at least partially a deliberate tactic, was to shift that, at least part of the blame onto other people,
onto individuals
through you know, poor messaging essentially. And it was about buying cover, really. You know what I mean?
It kind of plays into the political and social outlook anyway, of like individual responsibilities and like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I mean, you could even get into, they just don't give a fuck, mate. Like, they just don't care. Like, their economy is their god, and it makes them their money, and that's all they really give a fuck about. Like, we've, as a society as well, we've shifted. And I'll give Kieran Burns a shout out for All About Ability, because I've been doing a couple of bits and pieces with him teching his podcast, and it wasn't really until I sat and listened to a disabled person sit and go, what, do I no matter? For me to go, fuck, man. Right? Like, the whole of society is just turned on, like, the vulnerable, and like some sort of weird shift, like eugenic shift, into like, well, it only affects people with pre-existing conditions, and it only affects the elderly and the vulnerable. Well, do you know what pre-existing conditions include? Anxiety, hypertension, if you've had a previous mental health diagnosis, if you're currently on medication, and that can include sort of people that are on like fucking beta blockers or whatever it is, low level, they are all being counted as like pre-existing conditions. So when absolute fuckwits for the right on Twitter come out with some ridiculous claims like only 800 people have died through COVID without a pre-existing condition, go and look at the list of pre-existing conditions, because it looks like nearly every single fucking person has one of these. I mean, I get diagnosed with asthma when I was a wee boy, and then took off my inhaler when I was like 13. It's like a thing that affected me between like 8 and 13. But see, if I died of COVID-19, I would be classed as having a pre-existing condition. So, like, this is, so this was something that came out, but it wasn't until I sat, like, looking at somebody and going, do you know what, man? Like, how must they feel that the whole it feels like the whole of society's just went, well, fuck you, mate, because we need to get this capitalism rolling again. Like,
and it looks like that because that is exactly what we're being asked to do.
And it's,
you know what I mean, is to go, right,
very, very sad, man.
That's where I heard immunity and all these other things have come for, is that like callousness that, and like in a
the numbers on
market,
a fucking screen.
In a capitalist market, you're not looking for empathy as a driving force in the market, but at the same time, writing off lives is not a great look. I don't imagine that whatever point you're trying to make on Twitter or Facebook or wherever the fuck you're trying to make the point is enhanced by disregarding the sanctity of people's lives because they're 60 or they had a lung condition or whatever it is. Like, they don't become lesser humans because the circumstance, has changed and made them vulnerable. And if anything, we want to be members of a society that step up in those situations and actually value those lives more.
100%. I mean, I don't know what who the quote's for, but it's society should be judged on how they treat their their most vulnerable. I don't know whose quote that is, but I genuinely believe in that. And people have been, and I get it because there's small business owners that have been affected by this, and it's real lives, right? That are going without like their usual money and could impact their family, and understand that. But yous are as much victims of it as anybody else. Like, people have been brainwashed into like appeasing numbers on a fucking screen, like getting into their digital banking and their phone and looking at how much money is in their account is like a micro idea that happens on like a worldwide scale. Like, this money, it doesn't represent anything. It stopped representing real shit decades ago when they sold it all off to fucking Barronster books. Like, we're appeasing numbers on a screen and we're putting people's lives at risk to appease numbers on a screen. We could hit a fucking reset button. Like, we come up with a system, we could dismantle it, we could improve it, but we refuse. We're like stuck in this like sort of like, no, it must be, we need to. And you get guys like Trump that are proclaiming that COVID is over and that because the stock market starts to go in the right direction. And again, like, they're basing success and failure socially, and actual fact in all walks of life based on this market and based on how much money's moving between businesses, man. It's crazy to me, man. It's like,
especially the stock market. I mean, probably not surprising that it's the focus because it generates so much like sort of money, quote unquote. Like, it's all just algorithms bouncing numbers around between each other in a favourable manner, you know what I mean? Like, as you say. But I think when you look, particularly in America, you know what I mean? Like, the stimulus packages that they're getting offered. I mean, furlough has been an absolute lifeline for me. And, we said that, the government does deserve a level of credit for doing it, but they went kicking and screaming with their enforced up behind their back, and then they tried to bin it as quickly as they fucking could to have to then U-turn on that, and now we've got, furlough payments to happen when in next April. So, for me, that's been a huge lifeline. But then, when you look at America, what did they get? Like $1,200 check 6 months ago,
and then a $600 check.
So it looks like it's going to go up to. It looks like it's going to go up to 2,000. So Trump's basically fucked his party on the. No, it's him that's driving it now. So it was originally Bernie Sanders who said give everybody $2,000, and AOC and these left Republican, the left-leaning Democrats, and it all got battered out. And that we've signed it, sealed it, it's all there. And then Trump came out and went basically, I won't sign the bill unless it goes up to 2,000. So he's electioneering again. So he wants one of his last acts to be bumping everybody's money so that they remember him in 4 years' time.
Do you think he's going to run again?
Aye.
Oh man, I think one of his minions will go. I don't think he'll do it.
If he dies, maybe. But no, if he's still breathing in 4 years' time, I don't know if he'll get like the nomination or anything like that. Going to put it past him, but I think he's going to be here for a sizable proportion in the next 4 years. I mean, he's literally like burning everything, destroying all the bridges and like scorched earth on the way out the door to make. I mean, he's just stopped managing the pandemic. Full stop.
I've seen all that.
He's deliberately trying to make life as difficult for Biden to start out with as possible, whilst also now trying to bribe the American people. But they've had £1,200 or $1,200 for this entire time. You know what I mean? So
I know, mate.
It's like that ideology that we're talking about, where they just choose not to. I mean, one of the things that's going to be hopefully a big story in the new year, was in the Financial Times last week, and we talked about that bailout, the 30 billion, then the 330 billion after it. I seen a story in the Financial Times last week. It was talking about government-backed loans. Now, the government essentially made £26 billion available for government-backed loans to small businesses as the pandemic kicked off. Part of these packages that you're talking about.
In the UK?
In the UK, aye.
Okay.
But the loans were massively oversubscribed, and the government ended up spunking something like £87 billion on government-backed loans during the pandemic. But the Financial Times run with the story saying that 75% of those loans are unrecoverable because they've been the victims of fraud. So there was so little like checks happening to get this money moving as quickly as possible that like individual employers were going in and signing up for the maximum loans in the names of other employees. So getting like multiple loans out and stuff like that. And declaring themselves bankrupt, and like, so the government has just basically flushed like whatever 60 million quid in the 60 billion in the toilet.
This is the type of bullshit. I mean, where do we even start with that? But this is the type of bullshit that means that people talk out against things like socialism, or when people go, we should do this or we should do that, is that there are always people out there that are wanting to take and that something that they're no due. And when things like free university places, free healthcare, this is the type of shit that's used as like a battering ram against it, where they go, well, look at that, and that people and it's always business that does this. Like when we seen it in 2008 when they came out and they were trying to point the finger at people stealing benefits, and it turned out that only like 5% was happening, like 5% of benefit claims were benefit fraud. It's never normal working people that need their basic needs taken care of that take the piss like this. No. It's always the big boys, the big businesses. They always want to drain another fucking penny, another fucking pound out of you. And that's horrible. I think I mean, you can look back and go, the government could have done, they should have done more to restrict against it. But even when we look at the way that they've distributed the PPE budgets and Tory donors and their pals creating companies and taking 200 million here and 100 million there, it's just
that was the story of the summer for me. So it was like, that was the story of the summer for me, is it started to become obvious that, you know, companies that were incorporated 4 days before they won like a £100 million contract, companies that are known for creating vending machines, getting multi-billion pound PP contracts. Like, this is another one that as time passes, like, we need a proper shakeout of all this, so that we can see, where it all went, because you've got ministers that, have husbands and wives that are running some of these companies, that are on the boards of some of these companies, so there is like cronyism and corruption going on in just plain view in the UK all throughout the summer when it comes to these PP reserves, especially considering we're meant to have a national stockpile that just wasn't there, full stop.
Aye.
These N95 masks and stuff. I think Panorama did a really good expose on it during the summertime, where they're just like the entire system had been, stripped to the bone to sell off. And the cost of bringing it all back in to cover what was required in the pandemic was astronomical, and almost like all of that money went somewhere fucking dodgy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So that one should be inquiry central on the other side of it.
Absolutely, dude. Absolutely. I think we've spoken off about fucking COVID, and I mean that's us an hour and a half in. We spoke at length at Biden beating Trump, and I think I would like to, as we were saying earlier, actually, like, as Brexit nears completion, Dominic Cummings is getting to fuck the sort of pretty Patel stuff where she's getting done for bullying. Like, the Tories are in fucking uproar. The vaccination came in with like a sort of fanfare, a Britishness again, a German vaccination. 40 million are expected to land in 2021, but we were talking like Brexit might shadow that, but it doesn't look like that's going to be happening. But the big one for me, other than Christmas being announced and then cancelled again, the big one for me that I wanted to give a wee bit of time just before we wrap up, dude, if you don't mind, is the drug deaths in Scotland.
Of course.
We actually got a request through Twitter to talk about it. I don't know what we could really like lend to the conversation that hasn't been said already, but
I think at this point it's about keeping the pressure up.
Aye, absolutely.
The government has acknowledged that they've had shortcomings on this, that it's now time to make sure that they stay true to their word and that they actually do something meaningful. And
absolutely,
fair enough, they've Darren's run that campaign that got the minister sacked, or spearheaded a lot of the conversation on that. We need to move on for that now to like something productive and something where we can actually hold them to account on. We need a plan, we need it now, and it needs to be moving as quickly as humanly possible, or else the pressure that they've come under in recent weeks is coming back, and it's coming back every time they take their foot off the gas.
Absolutely, mate. I think there's an interconnection that's happened here, because when I was looking into it, 7 out of 10 victims of this are men, and 2/3 are 35 to 54, which sits right in the sweet spot of the suicide statistics.
Yeah.
So I think this is a mental health issue. I don't see this as being like a drug thing where people are like, obviously we need to date. I think we should just decriminalise drugs across the fucking board. I mean, that's my feeling on it. But I feel like this is, it's a bigger indicator. Like the deaths that are happening are like benzos, Valium, like fake drugs that people are buying on the streets because they can't get them for the frontline services. So people are going and buying like street Valium, which is like Valium that's been grinded up, mixed with all sorts of shit, and then reset back into a tablet that looks like a Valium, and people are taking them like fucking, 10 at a time.
Yeah.
This same shit's happening in kind of like rural America. We'd seen this happening, like we spoke about it in the podcast with the opioid thing. This is people that are just disconnecting for life. We grew up, me and you'll remember it. I definitely remember it. We grew up in a time when heroin was rampant in Glasgow, like the early 90s was the tail end of it, but that sort of 80s, 90s working class, like Easterhouse, Cranhill, the surrounding area, Black Hill, it was terrible for heroin addiction. And we're moving back towards that, right? And the only two things that I can draw as like parallels are just the way that the governments treat people. And like we're talking there, like they don't care. It's about money. It's about maximising profit. And that's what Thatcher's government did during the 80s. And that's what this government's doing now. They're trying to maximise profit out of this country. And we're slowly but surely slipping back into, again, we're turning back the clock on life expectancy, drug deaths, mental health issues, suicides. It's all like at its worst during a fucking global pandemic, man. And then you get guys like, and I'll edit this, is it Peter Krykant? How do you say that guy's surname?
I've always just been referring to him as drug man guy. Peter Kryant, maybe, I don't know.
It's okay. So we've got guys like Peter Krykant or Kryant, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, like sorry Peter mate, but that actually need to risk arrest, going out there and giving people like a safe place to go, like the safe consumption van that's in Glasgow. I think like this is like, I'm glad that the Scottish Government have come out and held their hands up, because this is a failing for me on services, austerity, budget cuts. I think in 2016 the SNP cut funding like to the research, and I think with they are saying that Westminster would hold the key for safe consumption. So that's one area that Westminster are like never going to let go, because we know they're just a bunch of fucking right-wing nutters. But the actually cutting the funding for me 4 years ago and then starting to see it slip back and back, 6% increase from 2019. It's crazy, mate. But I think that it was really like eye-opening for me to see the demographic and see the parallels between that and the suicide sort of thing that was.
There's symptoms of a wider malaise in our society rather than sort of driving factors, even though addiction for people who suffer it is a massive, massive issue.
Oh, it's an illness, mate. Aye, absolutely.
It's one of the ones where I'm happy at the minute to give a bit of faith to the process. The First Minister has come out on the front page of one of the biggest national newspapers in the country, and made it pretty clear that this is something that's going to be a priority. And I think in a year where the public health has been a really important factor for all of us, the notion that we just let people die because we think less of them as human beings is just unacceptable. And I think if the government have now seen that that's the way people feel about it, hopefully that can be something that really spurs on, hopefully a really positive change. But it's one of these ones like addiction. So you're kind of always fighting a losing battle if you're talking about it in such broad strokes at such a high level. You know what I mean? Like, individuals have victories, but this will be a battle that, even if we start to improve on it, is likely to almost always be there anyway. You know what I mean?
I think it will always be there, but I think that also we need to see more investment in frontline services, counsellors, recovery facilities, safe consumption, and stop criminalising people as well, because that's why they're ending up having to go to drug dealers for Valium. Like, they should be able to go to their GP with a concern of taking illegal drugs without a fear of conviction, and hopefully get the help that they need. But I think we also
need to look at methadone. This is the next one. Another one of the big issues when it comes to this is that, for some of the people we spoke to, including Aidan recently, all the way back through, Darren and Recovery Dundee and these types of guys, methadone is a big, it's kind of the elephant in the room. And a lot of this conversation is that so many thousands of people are just parked on it, and as we've seen for sometimes decades, you know what I mean, a life essentially imprisoned in addiction by the government. You know what I mean? It's something that we really, really need to fucking get a grip of very quickly.
I think methadone is just an actual bullseye for just making money, for just taking that solution that makes them the most money and then enforcing it on people. People are obviously going to take it if they're told that this is going to help you come off the monkey around your neck, or you know what I mean, this is really going to help you. And then people end up coming away for that saying that was worse than the fucking thing that got them hooked on it in the first place, that they were addicted to in the first place. So it isn't a solution. It's not a solution.
It's government mandated addiction. You know what I mean? It's, again, something that if we're using it to wean people off, fair enough, if it's a legitimate medical use. But I mean, just indefinitely parking entire communities of people on it and then forgetting about them is, how the fuck is that the answer? You know what I mean?
Aye, absolutely. I hope in the new year, mate, we might be able to get Peter in, maybe have a chat with him or somebody.
I think, considering some of the other folk we've had round about it, we're probably going to have to at least try. I'm going to maybe just wind up on a more positive note, because it has been a fucking glum year, man. I have enjoyed the podcast immensely. It's been something that has allowed me to just by the fingertips grasp onto the last thread of my sanity in places. But I think as well we've had some absolute fucking cracking podcasts. It's been good to explore, us chatting a wee bit more often, and starting to put our own personalities out there a wee bit. But at the same time, guest wise, I fucking love the books this year, Graham Armstrong, Kirsten Innocent, and Doug Stewart. Were an absolute pleasure to have in. Meeting James for Las Vegas and having just a pure, it was sitting down talking to an old mate, instantly, the guy was just so sound. They've been real highlights, man. And I think putting, as you say, some high quality guests together in a pandemic is something we can look back on with a wee bit of pride, I think.
Well, sure, mate, we had a fucking Booker Prize winner the week before he won the Booker Prize, you know what I mean? Literally, pure, what the fuck? Surreal. And seeing the growth as well, seeing the growth in numbers and the demographic of people that's watching. Obviously, we're talking in the sort of totals of an average episode, 500 folk, to an over average episode going into 1,000 people. That to me is incredible, absolutely incredible. Again, I agree with you completely. It's been a total lifeline for me this year. I don't know what I'd have done without it. And echoing exactly what you said, I think James for Las Vegas was a personal highlight for me, being like an ex-musician, and that's like my thing. But I can completely understand why you've just been geeking out on the authors, because that is like your thing. And I think we've had some, I mean, the names that we've had, mate, like they three names alone, with Graham, Kirsten, and fuck, I was going to say Shuggy. Douglas.
You're going to say Shuggy there?
I was going to say Shuggy there. It's unbelievable, and like,
There's a couple of honourable mentions that we didn't get to, I think.
Well, we spoke about BLM, we spoke about Tommy. I mean, we spoke to people about the issues, but I think this year as well, we've had an opportunity to engage with people that we wouldn't have normally have thought about speaking to. And again, just to think that we did a show like 4 or 5 days before Douglas won the Booker Prize is mind blown, mate. Mind blown.
Yeah.
So, aye, man.
Especially being so close to, obviously, we're in experiences and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
I also want to say, like, fucking massive fucking well played to the Scottish national team. It has been my entire adult life since we actually qualified for something. And, like, of course, being Scottish, we look at what is a really good team on paper, barring some defensive frailties. But it has to be sod's law that the one time we actually qualify for something, we do it by playing the dullest brand of football I've ever fucking seen in my life. I mean, watching Scotland is like being watching like Celtic in the last couple of weeks, where it is turgid, it is dull, it is like unimaginative. But like for once, it's actually getting it done. So like fucking brilliant. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
Grew up next to Davy Marshall, was more pals with his big brother than him per se. But, you know, knew him sort of partially grown up. To see him get those saves and actually, like, he had a rough time with Scotland. I think he was, like, 15, 20 games in before he ever managed a clean sheet. And, like, you know, people had asked questions about him on, the, you know, a national side front. And to see him get those, like, saves and become that hero, you know, both against Israel, you know, and in the final was just... I was really pleased for him, man. I think, you know, if we get round to independence, like, whatever the equivalent of a knighthood should be going to Davy Marshall.
Absolutely, mate, absolutely. Well, suppose we might do an episode thinking about 2021, thinking about 2021, but it kind of feels pointless, because if we had done an episode back at the start of 20, I don't think we did actually, like thinking about what's the year going to lie ahead. I'm sure we would have come up with some sort of outlandish plans about.
No, I think we were too busy with the world burning and going to war with Iran this time last year, so we just get straight into it. So we did. We've got a few guests lined up. A few folk have reached out in the DMs and stuff like that. Obviously, we've parked guests over Christmas and New Year because just chasing folk over the holidays just makes you the bad guy, man. So I should have some decent guests moving pretty quickly in the new year again.
Absolutely. Well, mate, cheers, and we'll catch up next year, mate.
Aye, here we...
I made a promise to whom will not to you, so stop the party. I tried to reconcile a life I lived a while, just stop the party. To call my own, we'll end up burning bridges sat upon a selfish throne. I will march along this path of ambitious, forceful ties. I'll be dead before it crashes down before my eyes. I know we'll make it through smiles and trials of fire. We'll make the party. I see right through it. The great desert to fade. You call a party. Feeding lies like you'll never know. I don't need to be unhappy with a life to call my own. We'll end up burning bridges sat upon a selfish throne. I will march along this path of ambitious, forceful ties. I'll be dead before it crashes down before my eyes. There is a life I can see. Life is so predictable, it must be. There is no